spells, of promises made in the dark that bound the unwary. As a skeptical 18-year-old, I dismissed these tales as folklore meant to scare children into obedience. But the summer I stayed with my aunt in Duskbloom, I learned the hard way why they warned, never open your eyes when enchanted. My Aunt Mira lived in a cottage at the edge of the village, its walls covered in ivy that seemed to pulse with life. She was a herbalist, her shelves lined with jars of dried leaves and roots, her hands always stained with earth. Mira was kind but cryptic, her warnings laced with riddles. "Keep your eyes sharp, Nora," she'd say, "but close them tight when the air feels wrong." I'd nod, humoring her, unaware of what she meant. It began on a humid July night, the air thick with the scent of jasmine and something sharper, like burnt sugar. I was restless, unable to sleep, so I slipped outside to sit on the porch. The village was quiet, the only sound the soft rustle of leaves from the forest beyond. As I gazed at the stars, a melody drifted from the trees, faint at first, like a lullaby, then stronger, weaving through my thoughts. It was beautiful, haunting, and it pulled at me, urging me to follow. I stood, my bare feet cool against the grass, and walked toward the forest. The melody grew clearer, a voice now, singing words I couldn't understand but felt in my bones. The air shifted, heavier, sweeter, and my head felt light like I was floating. Somewhere deep inside, a warning stirred Mira's words about closing my eyes, but the song drowned it out. I stepped into the forest, the trees closing around me like a curtain. The path was narrow, lit by a strange glow that didn't come from the moon. The voice led me deeper, its notes wrapping around my heart. I don't know how long I walked before I reached a clearing where a figure stood, a woman, or something like one. Her hair was long, shimmering like liquid silver, her eyes hidden in shadow. She wore a dress that moved like mist, and her smile was both kind and sharp. The song came from her, and it held me in place, my limbs heavy, my thoughts slow. "You're lovely," she said, her voice the melody itself. "Stay with me, see my world." I wanted to speak, to ask who she was, but my tongue was leaden. Her hand reached out, cool fingers brushing my cheek, and the world tilted. Colors bled into each other, the trees bending into impossible shapes. I felt myself slipping, my will dissolving into her song. Then Mira's warning cut through the fog. "Close them tight when the air feels wrong." I squeezed my eyes shut, the spell's pull weakening slightly. The woman laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Open your eyes, child. See what I offer." I shook my head, eyes clamped shut, my heart pounding. The air grew colder, the sweetness turning sour. Her voice sharpened, the melody twisting into something harsh. "Look at me," she hissed, her breath hot against my face. I stumbled back, tripping over a root, but kept my eyes closed. Images flashed in my mind, dancing under starlight, a feast of glittering fruit, a world where I was never alone, but beneath it, I sensed a hunger, a void that would swallow me whole. I whispered, "No," my voice trembling but firm. The ground shook, and the woman screamed a sound that wasn't human, tearing at my ears. I ran, eyes still shut, guided by instinct and the faint sound of the river. Thorns scratched my arms, branches snagged my hair, but I didn't stop. The scream faded, replaced by the rush of water. I collapsed on the riverbank, gasping, and only then dared to open my eyes. The forest was ordinary again, the glow gone, the air just air. I staggered back to the cottage, the sky lightening with dawn. Mira was on the porch, her face pale but unsurprised. She pulled me inside, locking the door, and made me drink a bitter tea that burned my throat. "You met her," she said, not a question. "The Lady of the Wood." "Who is she?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Mira sighed, setting the kettle on the stove. "A spirit? Older than Duskbloom? She lures the lonely, the curious, promising eternity in her world, but it's a lie. Those who go with her never return, not as themselves." "Why didn't you tell me?" I said, anger mixing with fear. "I tried," she said softly, "but some lessons must be felt." She explained the rules of enchantment. Never follow a voice that feels too perfect. Never eat or drink in the spirit's realm, and never ever open your eyes when the spell takes hold. Your eyes are the gate, she said. Once she has them, she has you. I didn't sleep for days, jumping at every sound, expecting the melody to return. Mira gave me a charma braided cord of herbs and Iranto wear around my wrist. "It'll dull her call," she said, but her eyes were worried. The village felt different now, its beauty laced with menace. I noticed things I'd missed before. Scratches on the cottage's door, a faint hum in the air at dusk, neighbors who avoided the forest's edge. One night, a week later, the melody came again, softer but unmistakable. I was in my room, the charm tight on my wrist, and I clamped my eyes shut, reciting Mira's rules like a prayer. The song pressed against my ears, promising peace, love, a world without pain. I felt the urge to run to it, to see the lady's face, but I gripped the charm, its heat grounding me. The melody faded, and I stayed put, safe but shaken. The next day, I went to the village elder, Mr. Thorne, who'd lived in Duskbloom all his 80 years. He listened to my story in his cluttered study, his face grim. "She's been here since the valley was young," he said. "We leave offerings flowers, bread to keep her quiet, but she still hunts. You're marked now. She'll try again." "Is there a way to stop her?" I asked. He hesitated, then pulled a leather-bound book from his shelf, its pages brittle. "There's a ritual, but it's risky. You'd need to draw her out, and burn her anchor something she's tied to, like a tree or stone, but if you fail, she'll take you." I didn't tell Mira about the ritual. I knew she'd lock me in the cottage if I tried. Instead, I waited, watching the forest, memorizing its paths. On the last night of summer, the melody returned, stronger than ever. I slipped out, the charm in one hand, a lighter, and a bundle of sage in the other. The forest glowed, the air thick with her spell. I kept my eyes half closed, focusing on the ground, and followed the song to the clearing. She was there, her form shimmering, her voice a blade of longing. "Look at me," she said, her words honey and poison. I didn't. Instead, lighting the sage and tossing it at her feet, the smoke curled upward, and she shrieked, her form flickering. In the clearing's center was a gnarled tree, its bark pulsing like a heartbeat. I doused it with oil from Mira's stores and set it ablaze. The lady's scream tore through the forest, the ground shaking, but I kept my eyes on the flames, never on her. When the tree was ash, the melody stopped, the air cleared, and the forest was just trees again. I stumbled home, singed and shaking, and found Mira waiting, her eyes wet. She didn't scold me, just held me tight. The lady was gone, or so I hoped, but I still wear the charm, and at night I keep my eyes closed, just in case. Terror from the fallen invisible fence. In the small town of Grey Hollow, where fog draped the streets like a shroud and the wind carried whispers of old secrets, our family home stood at the end of a quiet lane. It was a modest, weather-worn house, its paint chipped and its porch creaking underfoot. The backyard was bordered by a low stone wall, barely knee-high, that everyone assumed was just a relic from some long-forgotten garden. But the elders of Grey Hollow called it something else, the invisible fence. They said it wasn't the stones that mattered, but what they held back, something no one could see, yet everyone feared. I was 17, home from boarding school for the summer, when I learned what happened when that fence fell. My name is Caleb, and I'd always thought Grey Hollow's stories were just that, stories. My parents, both teachers, dismissed the town's superstitions as nonsense. But my great-uncle Amos, who'd lived in the house before us, was different. He'd visit sometimes, his eyes cloudy with age, muttering about keeping the line strong. I thought he was just eccentric until the night the terror began. It was a humid August evening, the air thick with the scent of rain and pine. I was in my room, headphones on, when I heard a crash from the backyard like stones tumbling. followed by a low, guttural hum that vibrated through the walls. I yanked off my headphones and ran to the window. The stone wall was in pieces, as if something had smashed through it. The backyard was dark, but the air shimmered like heat rising from asphalt. I grabbed a flashlight and crept outside, my sneakers crunching on the gravel. The wall was a mess, half its stones scattered across the grass. Beyond it, the forest loomed, its trees denser than I remembered, their branches swaying without wind. The hum was louder now, pulsing in my chest, and the air felt wrong too heavy, too cold for summer. I swept the flashlight beam across the trees, and for a moment, I saw something, a shape, tall and thin, its edges blurred like a smudge on glass. It vanished when the light hit it, but my skin prickled with the certainty that I was being watched. I ran back inside, locking the door, and called for my parents. They were in the kitchen, puzzled but unconcerned. "Probably just kids messing around," Dad said, peering out the window. Mom nodded, but her eyes lingered on the broken wall, a flicker of unease crossing her face. I didn't tell them about the shape or the hum. They wouldn't believe me. The next night, the hum returned, louder, joined by a scratching sound, like claws on wood. It came from the walls, the floor, even the ceiling. I checked the backyard again, and more stones were gone, as if something was dismantling the wall piece by piece. The forest seemed closer, its edge creeping toward the house. I called Uncle Amos, who lived in a nursing home an hour away. His voice was shaky but firm. "The fence is down, isn't it?" he said. "You need to fix it, Caleb. It's not just stones, it's a barrier." "A barrier for what?" I asked. He hesitated. "Something old, something that doesn't belong here." He told me the story over the phone, his words clipped with urgency. The stone wall wasn't just a garden feature. It was part of a ritual laid down generations ago to seal a rift, a tear in the world that led to somewhere else. The elders called it the invisible fence because its true power wasn't in the stones, but in the symbols carved beneath them, hidden in the earth. If the fence fell, the rift would open, and whatever lived on the other side could cross over. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Rebuild it," he said, "and don't look at what comes through." That night, I gathered the scattered stones, my hands shaking as the hum grew louder. The scratching turned to footsteps, heavy and uneven, circling the house. I worked fast, stacking the stones as best I could, but they felt wrong, like they were resisting me. The air grew colder, the shimmer in the forest brighter. I saw the shape again, closer now. Its form shifting, sometimes human, sometimes not. It didn't have a face, but I felt its hunger, its curiosity. I called my friend Maya, the only person in Grey Hollow who didn't laugh at ghost stories. She came over with a backpack full of salt and sage, things her grandmother swore by. "We need to find the symbols," she said, digging around the wall's base. "We found them, faint carvings in the dirt, spirals and lines that made my head ache to look at. Some were smudged, as if something had clawed them away." The footsteps grew closer, now inside the yard. Maya sprinkled salt over the stones, muttering words her grandmother had taught her. The hum faltered, but the shape didn't leave. It stood at the edge of the forest, watching. I kept my eyes on the ground, remembering Uncle Amos's warning. Maya grabbed my hand, her voice steady. "Keep working. Don't look up." We rebuilt the wall, stone by stone, tracing the symbols with a stick when we couldn't find the originals. The air grew heavier, the hum now a low growl. Something brushed past me, cold and sharp, like a blade of ice. I flinched, but kept my eyes down, stacking the last stone. Maya lit the sage, its smoke curling upward, and the growl became a wila sound that wasn't sound, but a pressure that made my ears pop. Then, silence. The air cleared, the shimmer faded, and the forest was just trees again. The wall stood, uneven but whole. We stepped back, panting, and I risked a glance at the forest. Nothing. No shape, no hum, just the quiet of a summer night. The next day, I visited Uncle Amos. He looked frailer than I remembered, but his eyes were sharp. "You did well," he said. "But it's not over. The rift is still there, and the fence won't hold forever." "What's on the other side?" I asked. He shook his head. "No one knows, but it knows us." We never spoke of it again, but I noticed things after that night scratches on the back door, a faint hum when the wind was still, shadows that moved against the light. My parents didn't believe me when I tried to explain, so I stopped trying. Maya and I kept watch, checking the wall every week, reinforcing the symbols with salt and ash. The shape hasn't returned, but I feel it sometimes, waiting just beyond the trees. The house is still ours, but it doesn't feel like home anymore. It's a guard post, a line between our world and something else. Every night, I check the locks and listen for the hum, knowing the invisible fence might fall again, and next time, stones alone might not be enough. Before that grave was moved, in the sleepy hamlet of Crow's End, where fields of barley swayed under a perpetually gray sky, our family farm had stood for generations. The house was old, its timbers groaning with stories, its windows fogged with age. Beyond the barn, at the edge of our land, was a small graveyard, just 3 headstones, moss-covered and tilting like weary sentinels. The graves belonged to the Halloways, the family who'd built the farm in the 1700s. Everyone in Crow's End knew the graves were untouchable, a silent pact woven into the town's bones. I was 16, too young to understand why, until the summer they decided to move one of those graves. My name is Sarah, and I'd grown up hearing whispers about the Halloways. They were the town's founders, but their legacy was shadow tales of strange rituals, of a pact with the land that kept Crow's End fertile while neighboring towns withered. The graveyard was sacred, or cursed, depending on who you asked. My father, a practical man with calloused hands, scoffed at the stories. "Just old graves," he'd say. But my grandmother, who lived with us, would clutch her rosary and mutter, "Leave the dead where they lie." That summer, a developer from the city bought the land next to ours, planning a strip mall. The problem was the smallest grave, set slightly apart from the others, its headstone barely legible. Eleanor Halloway, 1,740 to 1,760. It sat just over the property line, and the developer wanted it moved. The town council, swayed by promises of jobs, agreed despite protests from the elders. They hired a crew to relocate the grave to the churchyard a mile away. My father was hired to help, and I was roped in to clear brush around the site. The work began on a muggy July morning, the air thick with the scent of earth and decay. The crew arrived with shovels and a backhoe, their faces uneasy despite their jokes. I hacked at the weeds, my skin prickling as I neared Eleanor's grave. The headstone was cracked, the name etched deep, as if resisting time. The ground around it was oddly soft, like it had been turned recently, though no one had touched it in years. As I worked, I heard a faint hum, like a voice too low to catch, coming from the earth. The crew chief, a burly man named Tom, laughed off my hesitation. "Just your imagination, kid," he said, but his eyes avoided the grave. They started digging, the backhoe's roar drowning out the hum. I watched from a distance, my stomach twisting. The soil came up dark, almost black, and wet, though it hadn't rained in weeks. When they reached the coffin, the hum stopped, replaced by a silence so heavy it pressed against my ears. The coffin was small, wood-rotted but intact, carved with symbols I didn't recognize as spirals, crosses, lines that seemed to writhe in the light. Tom hesitated, then pried it open. Inside was nothing, no bones, no cloth, just a layer of ash that stirred in the breeze. The crew muttered, crossing themselves, but the job was done. They loaded the coffin into a truck and drove it to the churchyard, where a new plot waited. I stayed behind, staring at the empty hole, feeling like we'd broken something that couldn't be fixed. That night, the house felt different. The air was colder, the shadows sharper. I woke around midnight to a scratching sound, like nails on wood, coming from the walls. I checked my room, the hallway, nothing, but the sound followed me, faint but persistent, like it was inside my head. Downstairs, Grandma was awake, her rosary in hand, her face pale. "You moved her, didn't you?" she whispered. "It was just a job," I said, but my voice shook. She shook her head. "Eleanor wasn't like the others. She was the price." I didn't understand, but her words clung to me. The next day, strange things started happening. The barn door, always latched, swung open overnight. The cows refused to eat, their eyes wild. My father found footprints in the field small, barefoot, leading from the old grave to the house. He blamed vandals, but I saw the fear in his eyes. At night, the scratching grew louder, now joined by a whisper, soft and urgent, saying my name. I went to the town library, a cramped room above the post office, and dug through old records. The Halloways were mentioned often, their wealth tied to the land's unnatural bounty. A journal from 1760, written by a pastor, told of Eleanor's death. She was young, the pastor wrote, but marked by the family's sin. Her grave was set apart, not out of disrespect, but to bind what she held. The words chilled me. What had she held? The whispers grew stronger each night, now a voice, female and mournful, calling from the backyard. I avoided the windows, but one night I couldn't resist. I looked out and saw Hera girl, pale and thin, her dress tattered, standing where her grave had been. Her eyes were empty, but they locked on mine, and the whisper became a scream in my head, "Return me." I told Grandma everything. She didn't scold me, just took my hand and led me to a room where she kept a box of old papers. Inside was a deed, yellowed and brittle, signed by the Halloways. It promised the land's prosperity so long as the seal remains unbroken. Grandma's voice was steady but grave. Eleanor was the seal. Her grave kept something in or out. "What do we do?" I asked. "We put her back," she said. The next day, we went to the churchyard, Grandma clutching a shovel like a weapon. The new grave was pristine, but the ground around it was cracked, as if something had tried to claw its way out. We dug in silence, the air growing colder with each scoop. The coffin was there, still empty, but the ash inside stirred, forming shapes, faces, hands, eyes. Grandma whispered prayers, her hands trembling, and we carried the coffin back to the farm. The crew refused to help, and my father, pale and silent, drove the truck. We placed the coffin in its original hole, covering it with the black soil. Grandma sprinkled salt and herbs, muttering words I didn't understand. The hum returned, softer now, like a sigh. The girl didn't appear again, and the whispers stopped. The barn door stayed shut, the cows calmed, and the footprints faded. But the house never felt the same. Shadows lingered in corners, and the air carried a faint hum like a warning. The developer's project-stalled equipment broke, workers quit, and the land stayed barren. Crow's End went quiet, but I saw the looks the elders gave our farm, a mix of fear and respect. Grandma never spoke of it again, but she kept the deed locked away, a reminder of the price we'd almost paid. I left for college that fall, eager to escape, but every night I check my windows, half expecting to see her Eleanor, standing in the dark, waiting for her grave to be moved again. Because I know now, some things, once disturbed, never truly rest. The Scream from the Heirloom Doll. In the village of Mistvale, where the hills were cloaked in fog and the air always carried a hint of damp earth, our family home stood like a relic from another time. It was a creaky two-story house with narrow windows and a roof that sagged under the weight of countless winters. My mother inherited it from her great-aunt, along with a collection of oddities that filled the attic-old clocks, chipped teacups, and a single porcelain doll that no one ever touched. The doll, with its painted smile and glassy eyes, was the family's heirloom, said to be older than Mistvale itself. I was 17, home for the summer, when I learned why it was called the Screaming Doll. My name is Elise, and I'd always found the doll unsettling. It sat in a locked glass case in the attic, its white dress yellowed with age, its black curls still glossy despite the years. My mother called it a treasure, but she never explained why we kept it locked away. My younger brother, Sam, only 12, was obsessed with it, always begging to see it closer. "It's just a doll," he'd say, but I saw the way his eyes lingered on its too perfect face, like he sensed something I didn't. The trouble started on a rainy August night, the kind where the wind howled and the house groaned like a living thing. I was in my room, sketching, when a scream tore through the house, a high, piercing wail that wasn't human. I dropped my pencil and ran downstairs, heart pounding, expecting to find Sam hurt. He was in the living room, pale but unharmed, staring at the ceiling. "It came from the attic," he whispered. My mother was at work, a night shift at the local diner, so it was just us. I grabbed a flashlight and told Sam to stay put, but he followed, his curiosity stronger than his fear. The attic stairs creaked under our weight, the air growing colder with each step. The glass case was still locked, the doll unchanged, but its eyes seemed to follow us, its smile sharper in the flashlight's beam. The scream came again, softer now, but unmistakable, echoing from the doll itself. I backed away, my skin crawling. Sam reached for the case, but I grabbed his hand. "Don't!" I said, my voice shaking. We locked the attic door and waited for Mom, neither of us sleeping. When she got home, I told her everything. Her face tightened, and she went to the attic alone, emerging with a key she kept hidden in her jewelry box. "It's just the wind," she said, but her hands trembled. The screams continued every night, always around midnight, faint but piercing, like a cry trapped in glass. Sam started sneaking to the attic, drawn to the doll despite my warnings. One night, I caught him with the key, the case open, his fingers inches from the doll's face. "It talks to me," he said, his eyes distant. "It wants to be free." I dragged him out, locking the case and hiding the key. The next day, I went to the village archive, a dusty room in the town hall, to find answers. The librarian, Mrs. Varn, knew every story Mistvale held. I asked about the doll, and her eyes darkened. She pulled out a ledger from the 1800s, its pages brittle with age. The doll, she said, was made by a woman named Clara Hollowell, a toy maker who'd lost her daughter, Lila, to fever. Clara poured her grief into the doll, crafting it in Lila's likeness, but rumors said she wove something else into it, something not of this world. "They say Clara made a pact," Mrs. Varn whispered, "to keep Lila's spirit close. But spirits don't rest easy in porcelain. The doll was locked away after Clara vanished, and every family that owned it heard the screams." "What does it want?" I asked. Mrs. Varn shrugged. "No one knows, but it's tied to the Hallowells and your family's blood." I didn't tell Mom what I'd learned. She'd always dismissed the doll's history, but I saw the fear in her eyes when the screams woke her. The noises grew worse, scratching, whispers, footsteps in the attic when no one was there. Sam grew quieter, his obsession with the doll deepening. One night, I found him sleepwalking, standing before the locked case, muttering words I couldn't understand. I called Mrs. Varn desperate. She came to the house with a bundle of sage and a small iron knife. "The doll's a vessel," she said. "It holds something, maybe Lila, maybe something worse. You need to break the bond." She showed me a ritual. Burn the sage, carve a symbol of release a circle with a slash into the case, and bury the doll far from the house. Mom was skeptical but agreed, too tired to argue. That night, we went to the attic. The air thick with the smell of dust and something sweeter, like rotting flowers. The doll's eyes seemed to glow, its smile mocking. Mrs. Varn lit the sage, the smoke curling toward the ceiling, and carved the symbol into the glass. The scream came again, louder, shaking the walls. Sam lunged for the case, his eyes wild. "She needs me!" he shouted. I pulled him back, my arms aching as he fought. Mrs. Varn opened the case, and the air turned cold. The the scream now a wail that clawed at my mind. She grabbed the doll, wrapping it in cloth, and we ran outside, the rain soaking us. We drove to a field beyond Mistvale, where the earth was soft and untouched. Mrs. Varn dug a hole, muttering prayers, and buried the doll deep, covering it with salt and ash. The scream stopped. The house felt lighter, the air cleaner. Sam snapped out of his trance, confused but himself again. Mom burned the glass case in the backyard, the flames hissing in the rain. We never spoke of it, but I saw the relief in her eyes. Months later, I found a scrap of Clara's journal in the attic, hidden in a crack in the floor. It read, "Lila is in the doll, but so is her pain. Forgive me. I burned it, hoping it would end things."